The following is a local resident producers program. The program content is the sole responsibility of the producer and does not necessarily reflect the views or policies of CATV2, Oshkosh Community Access Television, the City of Oshkosh, the Oshkosh Cable Television Advisory Commission, or Time Warner Cable.
Hi everyone, welcome to another edition of Eye on Oshkosh. I'm Cheryl Hentz along with my co-host Tony Palmeri. On this edition, we're very pleased to welcome back for the second time during this campaign season the Republican candidate for Winnebago County District Attorney, Mr. Christian Gossett. He will be facing Democratic candidate Joe Mansky in the November 7th election. Mr. Mansky was invited to appear on the show also. He indicated he's doing something different with his campaign this time around. I'm not sure what that exactly means, but he's not going to be appearing on too many shows or whatnot. So anyway, but we're happy that you're here, and you get the whole hour yourself. How about that? So
well, very good. Thank you.
First of all, congratulations on
thank you very
winning
much.
the primary last month. A really wonderful job, and I'm sure you were elated with that. But beyond that, what was your reaction to the victory?
Well, like you said, we were elated. We were very happy with the numbers. We were very happy with the spread. Of course, that was the primary, so that lasted for a day or so, and now it's the general. So
all right.
No rest.
So are you doing anything different now that the primary is behind you and you're facing the general election, or is your general campaign strategy still pretty much the same?
It's still pretty much the same. It's the same message we've had since the very start of this, when we didn't know exactly who our competition would be. So, it's back to the plan for the DA's office, back to moving law enforcement forward, and we're just simply trying to get the word out.
Okay. And that has been your message, moving law enforcement forward. Explain to Tony and I and the viewers, what do you mean by that?
Well, what we're talking about turning the DA's office into more of a proactive organization. We're also talking about working with law enforcement and becoming goal-oriented, establishing clearly defined goals so that we can all move in unison, work with the community, work with whoever has an interest in public safety, get them on board with us. Let's all work together as a community, as law enforcement groups, and move in the same direction to try to accomplish these specific goals that are identified.
Mm-hmm. How's that different than what you have right now, other than the obvious that the Joe Paulus fiasco created some problems within law enforcement, but how else is it different?
Well, I think it's different in a couple of respects. One, we're talking about an office that currently is more reactive, which is fine. Many district attorneys' offices are. But I'd like to take us and make us proactive. I don't want to wait for everything bad to happen. Online sexual predators is one of the easiest examples there. With online sexual predators, we can either wait for a child to be abducted physically and then go do something about it, or we can get some investigators trained so that they can get out and fish online, find these people, we can track them down and get them before they grab a child.
Okay.
Isn't there a risk, Christian, and it's nice to meet you finally, and congratulations also on the election.
Thank you.
Isn't there a risk with a proactive prosecution that prosecutors, law enforcement can become a little too overzealous? That in the attempt to get the bad guys, some of the good guys get ensnared?
I don't think so, because what we're talking about isn't trying to catch them before they act and then claiming that they were going to. Mm-hmm. What we're doing is we're talking about getting them for a different type of offense. So you can have child enticement before you have child abduction. Certainly child abduction is going to carry more serious penalties, but we don't want our children abducted just so we can get a higher penalty. I'd rather get them at the child enticement stage.
Well, let me use an example from, say, drugs. One thing we've had in the county for a long time now is the Metropolitan Enforcement Group.
Correct.
The MEG unit.
Yeah.
These are the kind of undercover drug enforcement agents, correct?
Correct.
But haven't we had at least one major instance where they broke down the door of the wrong person It's happened a few times, maybe.
I do seem to recall something
right,
about that. Went to
so-
a wrong address?
Yeah, but isn't
Okay.
that an example of kind of overzealousness in
Oh,
law
I
enforcement?
think that's just a mistake. Yeah. When it comes right down to it, law enforcement and prosecution is still people. People doing the best they can. Everybody makes mistakes at some point in their career. We have so many safeguards in law enforcement and prosecution in the criminal justice system because what we do is so serious. And we try to minimize that.
But what are the safeguards? To my knowledge, no one in the MEG unit was ever fired for that mistake.
Right. Well, if you're going to get a warrant, if you're going to knock down a door, you have to get a warrant. So the first thing you do is you get the information. You'll get that from, oftentimes it'll be multiple officers. Then that'll go to the department. They'll put together the information in affidavit form for the prosecutor. The prosecutor will go through, review all of the information, ask some follow-up questions, make sure that we have probable cause, that we meet all of our legal standards. We'll put it together in an actual search warrant. Then we'll take it and present it to a judge or a court commissioner. Then the judge or the court commissioner will review it. The wrong door, and I don't know the details, so I apologize, I can't answer that specific one. I vaguely have a recollection of that happening, but with all of those safeguards, ideally we're not knocking down anybody's door unless we have good reason. A wrong address, something like that, that's hard
But
to
you think
explain.
that, I want to stay on that issue for a minute. You think the drug problem in Winnebago County is serious enough to warrant the continuation of this unit?
I think the drug problem in Winnebago County is getting out of control.
Out of control?
Yeah, we had 2 students, I believe they were UW students, who died last year, overdose of prescription drugs. We have a homicide case pending right now where there was a home invasion into an apartment and the occupant was shot. That case is pending right now, shot and killed. So drugs, I think we're seeing more violence associated with drugs. Certainly the 2 that we're looking at in the UW incident, I believe that was just simply an overdose, if I recall. But we're seeing more gang-related activity coming up from the Milwaukee and Chicago areas. We see these people coming up in rental cars, renting hotel rooms for a week at a time, dealing drugs going back. Well, these are career drug dealers. These are people who know that we can't seize a rental car. We can't seize a hotel room. So they're minimizing their own exposure. And so I think it's getting worse. What we haven't seen too much of, and I think we will see in the future, is we're not seeing as much of the gang violence that's drug-related coming down from Appleton. And I'm not sure why that is. I can't explain that myself, but I think that at some point we will. But instead, right now, we're seeing it coming up from Milwaukee and Chicago. Out at the university, it's my understanding that some methamphetamine has been recovered this last year. We have meth labs in Outagamie County. I mean, it keeps coming closer and closer, and some of it is coming right in here. So I think the drug problem is getting pretty bad. Prescription drugs have also gotten out of hand.
But what can your office do, or what can the DA do about abuse of prescription drugs?
Well, with abuse of prescription drugs, we can educate pharmacies and doctors. This is what to look for. This is how you identify doctor shopping. This is, if you have somebody and you question the prescription, don't just call the doctor and then take it to the person and say, hey, there seems to be an error. If it's supposed to be for 10 pills or 10 milligram pills and it says 40, and you confirm that it's supposed to be 10, call the police. We have to get the police to respond quickly so we can get the person at the scene. So I think that we can all work together to try to address some of these problems.
All right, Cheryl.
It's not a question that relates to your candidacy necessarily, Christian, but kind of on the same lines of the MEG unit and so forth. That instance, I remember that too, where the door was busted down. Now that was broken down with a no-knock warrant. Now what threshold do your office or the policing agency, what threshold does someone have to meet to go beyond just a search warrant and get that no-knock warrant?
It's pretty high. In fact, we do very few of them anymore. But don't be confused. There's not a lot of time that we have to give. So oftentimes you'll have a knock at the door, and if there's not pretty quick movement towards opening that door, they come in. And the reason for it is drugs get flushed down toilets very, very quickly. And oftentimes when you're dealing with drugs, you're also dealing with people who have weapons. So because drugs and weapons go hand in hand, there's oftentimes a fear that if you give them too much notice, by the time you come through the door, the drugs are going down the toilet and they're standing there with firearms, things of that sort. So we've gone away from the no-knock quite a bit. There has to be some pretty serious concerns before we'll do those, but we're also not giving a whole lot of notice. We want to see people coming right away. But when the police knock for a search warrant, it's not a regular knock, it's not ringing the doorbell. You know it's the police. They're pretty loud about it.
And speaking of police, during the primary campaign, there was an issue about your resume being given out to Michelle Pennywell's campaign by your current boss. Did you ever find out exactly what that was all about and what they were fishing for?
All I know is what was said by the other candidate, which was they wanted to confirm that I was a police officer.
Okay, and in fact you were.
Right.
I mean, you weren't for very long, I think, is what you said when you were on here the
Correct.
first time.
Correct.
But you were with the...
I was with, at the time it was the
department?
Town of Pewaukee Police Department. They've now become a city.
Okay.
Too much of their land was being annexed by the other municipalities, so now they're a pretty chopped up city.
Sure. And you were with them for how long?
Oh, 3 months.
Okay, all right.
I had, when I was in the police academy, I had, the legal section was taught by a prosecutor, a deputy district attorney in the Waukesha District Attorney's Office. And he came and taught the legal section. I was really intrigued by what he had said, so I actually went and followed prosecutors around for a day and decided I wanted to go to law school. So I signed up to take the law school admission test while I was still in the police academy, and I graduated on a Friday, was down at Marquette University to take the LSAT on Saturday, and then getting ready and getting off to law school shortly afterwards. So.
If you win next month, I mean, obviously you'll be taking over an office that there are some people there who obviously wanted Michelle Pennywell to win.
Right.
Not just the primary, but they wanted her to go all the way and get the position. That will probably be somewhat uncomfortable for everyone involved if you win. What will your modus operandi be? How will you approach the situation? And I know when we had talked privately, you had said there's going to be some new rules, so maybe you can talk about those a little bit too.
Sure. This whole thing has been about a new way of doing business in the DA's office, creating the specialized prosecutors, more timely filing of criminal complaints, developing some expertise within the office, as well as some expertise in law enforcement, spending more time training law enforcement officers. So all of these programs are still going to be initiated. They'll be implemented. Everybody's welcome to stay. There will be the new way of doing business, and that's not going to change. It's not going to be negotiable. Certainly the details of everything will be negotiable, but we still need to do this. We need to bring the district attorney's office up to speed, and we need to prepare ourselves for the future. Part of the problem is that we keep on having to work with fewer and fewer resources, and one of the things that I think people oftentimes forget is that even if we stay at our current level of 10 prosecutors, the population of the community grows. The crime rate grows. We're dealing with more serious offenses. The legislature keeps making more and more things felony, so we have more evidentiary hearings, more more preliminary hearings, things of that sort. So there's more work to be doing, and we've got to move away from kind of this solo practitioner style and get into a specialized system. It's best for the county, and I think everybody in the office just has to realize that we're there for the county's benefit, not for our own individual benefit.
So the new rules will be what then?
Essentially what they are right now. Everybody's going to have a caseload. The caseload right now, for most of the attorneys, your caseload comes in 2 months out of the year. You get dumped on with a bunch of cases and you have to try to chart those out. That'll be spread out. There won't be the feast or famine type of criminal prosecution going on. You'll have a steady amount of cases coming in, I guess, throughout the year, and we're going to try to focus more, going back to it being goal-oriented, what are the key problems? What's causing the most damage to our community? What's impacting quality of life most adversely in Winnebago County? Well, that's going to be a target. then not only will we identify that for the DA's office, but also with law enforcement. Then we'll try to get people moving in the same direction on it. So one person, say the person who's prosecuting all of the drug dealers, well, that person may be given fewer of the misdemeanor cases, which will be used to kind of balance out everybody's caseload. They may be given a slightly lighter caseload because we want to have more of an impact on the drug dealers. And so we'll be able to vary it as we establish the goals, things of that sort.
All right.
Christian, the word on the street about you, at least that I've heard, is that you're is that you're a level-headed guy, very competent, but very pleasant, almost mild-mannered in a way. And so there's been questions raised about, are you tough enough for this job? What is there in your experience and in what you plan to do that demonstrates the kind of toughness that people associate with a DA position?
It's interesting because when I talk to the defense bar, oftentimes the criticism that I get is that I'm a little bit too hard on things. And so I don't disagree with what you're hearing, but I suspect you're probably hearing that from the community groups that I'm involved in, the people that I do things with in an extracurricular sense. I just did a jury trial Monday of this week, and it was a felony case, not terribly aggravated, but aggravated enough or serious enough that I thought we had to send a message out as opposed to going after the particular individual. All they wanted to resolve it was some sort of misdemeanor resolution. I stuck to my guns, said no, and we went. And I've gotten criticisms for the way that I handle felonies. I stick to my guns when it comes to not amending things from felony to misdemeanor. I focus very much on what's the message to the community, what's the bigger picture, as opposed to what's the individual. And in my view, it helps me stay, fair and unbiased, so I don't get too wrapped up in the person. But then the criticism that I get back is that I'm being too hard on these people. So I don't think it's going to be a problem. And I think most of the defense attorneys that I work with would agree that that's probably not a problem I have in the courtroom.
All right. Well, what is your philosophy about things like plea bargaining? Do you think, as a DA, are there some occasions where a plea should never even be considered?
Oh, sure.
Okay, well, what would be an example of that?
First-degree homicide.
Right.
That's something where you're going to do all of the motions, you're going to do the prelim, actually pretty much any type of a homicide case. You can usually expect that you're going the entire distance.
On something like first-degree homicide, if you're elected, are those crimes that you would personally handle?
Most likely.
You most likely would.
Yeah.
Why would that be the case?
Well, because I think once your name's on the door, your reputation is on the line, and when those cases come in, the entire office's reputation is on the line. I think whoever's name is on the door is the one who's responsible to either sink or see some sense of glory out of those cases. But if you're going to bring them into the office, if you're going to prosecute them, if you're going to bring that much attention to the DA's office, which you have to do, you have to bring it there, but then you also have to be the person.
And just one thing related to that, Cheryl, it seems like speaking of homicides, it seems like we've had a great increase in those.
I think
disturbingly so.
Yeah, I think we've currently got 8 pending in Winnebago County.
Why? Why, in your opinion, have we seen this increase in those kinds of violent crimes?
Well,
and what can you do about it as a DA?
There's a few different ways that we're seeing them come in. First of all, impaired driving. Still is accounting for probably 40% of the homicides on average each year. Either drunk drivers, drug drivers, domestic incidents are still accounting for some of them, and drug-related incidents seem to be accounting for some of them. We also get some occasional ones that don't fall into those categories. Obviously there's a case pending now that doesn't fall into that, but most of them do. So we have to take a harder line on impaired drivers. With the drug court up and running, there's some new legislation that may allow us to get some drunk drivers involved in treatment as early as a second offense. Right now, we really can't force treatment on them until their 4th offense. So, programs like that may very well help. Tougher sentences on felony drunk driving, which is a 5th offense or greater in the state of Wisconsin, so you get a lot of shots before you get to a felony. So taking a tougher line on those people may help as well.
Right.
Domestic violence, one of the things that I'd like to see us do is I'd like to see us go to an evidentiary-based investigation and prosecution of domestic violence incidents. Give us a little higher success rate, but then also get some diversion programs in place for the nonviolent offenders. That way we can just sort of get people sidetracked, get them into whatever specific program they need, whether it's anger management, it's alcohol issues, drug issues. Try to identify the problem, get them some help. We'll never be able to stop crime.
Right.
We'll keep chipping away at it as much as we can. With the drug trade and the homicides that come from that, the drug trade is something that I plan on hitting as hard as we possibly can.
Okay. Cheryl?
With first-degree murder, in many states comes the opportunity for a defendant to be prosecuted, and if convicted, they get to go for the death penalty. We don't have the death penalty in the state right now. However, there is a referendum on next month's ballot asking if that should be brought back in the state of Wisconsin. Not asking you to tell us how you're going to vote on that, but if that were to pass and we eventually had the death penalty implemented again in Wisconsin, how would that change your prosecutorial methods, if you will, or would it?
I don't think that it would. I think it would certainly require far more resources than we currently have. Imposing capital punishment isn't as simple as saying, okay, this person was going to go to prison for the rest of their life, now we're going to execute them instead. With capital punishment comes automatic appeals. Even though there's not technically a higher standard, it oftentimes appears that there's a higher standard of review. There's a higher incidence of these cases being kicked back to be tried again. You'll see even more motions during the course of the case. You'll see people having to come back over and over and over again. I think it gets to be harder on the victims' families and friends. But it's such a strain on resources that, certainly I think we'll see one of two things. Either the state would provide us with the necessary resources so that we could adjust for it, or, and I'm just talking statewide, because in Winnebago County I don't think that it would impact us that much. We don't see it very often. Fortunately, we're still a relatively friendly community, nice place to live, things of that sort. So
except during campaign season.
Except during campaign season, yeah. Yeah, then you got to turn the TV off. It gets a little violent. But I don't think it would impact us too much here in Winnebago County, but statewide I think it would have a pretty serious impact. And so with those types of things, if the state came through and backed it up with the personnel that would be needed, the resources that would be needed, I think one of the part of the question has to do with DNA. Is that part of what's on the referendum?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. And assuming that it was backed up by DNA, well, that depends on. I see what they're getting at, and they want to make sure that it's a really, really solid case. But DNA isn't always an issue in a first-degree homicide case. And right now, if you want DNA evidence from the crime lab, you're waiting a long time. So now you have to increase the resources for the crime lab, or you have to bump all of those other sexual assault cases and things of that sort that they're waiting for DNA evidence even farther back, so that you can prioritize those cases, which they most likely would prioritize those. So I see that it would be a strain on the system overall, but it wouldn't. I don't think it would actually change what we do here in Winnebago County.
Okay. All right.
As you know, Christian, during the Paulus years, a culture of corruption was developed in the Winnebago County Courthouse. What's your assessment of where we are now? Did Bill Lennon clean all this up? Would you be going into an office now that right now meets your standards of where we need to be? Are there any improvements needed now? What do you think?
I think we still need to improve our image with the community.
All right.
I believe that Bill Lennon has gotten us to the point where, assuming the election goes my way and I'm able to get in there, I can have a fresh start. I don't think that I'm going to have to go through all of the issues that they did. Certainly the Paulus investigations and prosecutions through the state are done.
Well, let me stop you there. Is the book on Joe Paulus closed? He now has been sentenced to, I guess, 2 more years onto his federal sentence, correct? And the Attorney General, Lautenschlager, seems to be satisfied that this is all closed. Is Winnebago County now prevented from doing any more investigation into Paulus?
I don't think that we're technically prohibited.
But if you get elected, is this a closed book for you?
It's a closed book.
It is a closed book?
It is.
What if, and I have a sense this is probably going to happen. Let's, for some sake of argument, you win the election, and you start getting letters, emails, phone calls from people who claim they do have evidence of something that happened. Are you going to say that's it? It's over? What if it's credible evidence?
If it's credible evidence, then it's going to be turned over to the state.
All right, so you don't want any more investigation done at this level?
Well, one of the problems is we're already at a critical level in the Winnebago DA's office. And
critical level meaning?
Well, we're short-staffed a little bit. I think when we improve our efficiency, things of that sort, we can get ourselves on track. I'm not worried about that. But the state has us slated for 12 and a half or 13 attorney positions. We have 10. Anything that we do going back into the past is going to take away from what we're trying to do to improve our community now.
Yeah.
So the Attorney General's office has already got a great deal of time and energy invested, and so I would suspect that if new credible evidence came about, they would still be willing to take a look at it.
But do you think it's credible that, and this seems to be what the DA has concluded, Lautenschlager, that, or whoever she had studying this, that essentially it was Joe Paulus and Mitch Shearland, essentially, these two characters
operating in a vacuum.
Is that credible? Can the county, can people in the county believe that it was one corrupt DA and one corrupt lawyer?
Well, what you may be looking at, I guess, in a different perspective is the AG's office was only talking about the bribery scandals, correct? Is that a fair assessment that that's essentially what they investigated, what they prosecuted?
Yeah.
So if that's what they were talking about and they concluded that those were the only two people involved in the bribery scandal, fine. If there's other issues, I don't know exactly what the extent of what they looked into was. And my understanding initially was that they were taking a look at all sorts of things, but then in the end it kind of sounded like that was what they had focused in on.
Okay, the reason why I bring this up is because I agree with you that there still needs to be work done on the image.
Oh yeah.
It just strikes me that that's going to be very, very difficult to fix, the image, as long as what the public is being told that it essentially was two corrupt guys for a fairly long period of time. That just doesn't seem credible. But I also agree with you that we can't spend all of our time digging into the past.
Well, and one of the things I'm hoping, I never worked for Paulus, I never worked with Paulus, and this is part of moving law enforcement forward, getting beyond it. We have a specific function in the district attorney's office. We're supposed to prosecute criminals. We're supposed to help law enforcement investigate crime. We're supposed to hold people accountable, make our community a safer place to live.
Sure.
And I just see that we have, we were just talking about the increased violent crime. To me, that's more important. Reducing the number of homicides each year, going after online sexual predators, getting the drug dealers back out of Winnebago County as much as we possibly can. We have to pick and choose.
Sure.
And that's where I would focus my efforts.
Okay. Cheryl?
What do you say, still kind of on the Joe Paulus thing, what do you say, Christian, to the people out there, and there are, I don't know how many, but there's a fair amount of people in the community who say that basically there should just be a completely clean house and you should start from scratch. No one who was associated with Paulus should be allowed to continue in their jobs. Now, I mean, obviously he was there in that office for so long.
Right.
He touched virtually everybody, whether he was friend or foe with them. He touched virtually everybody within the local law enforcement community. But for those who were friendly with him, do you think that it's reasonable or prudent to just clean house and get rid of all these folks?
Well, whether it's reasonable or prudent, I don't think actually matters. Prosecutors are union employees, so there isn't an option of cleaning house. Also, 7 out of 10 attorneys in that office never worked for Paulus. So we do pretty much have a fresh start. We have new people. We have people who weren't associated at all. Beyond that, I don't really know. I mean, I don't think we'll ever make everybody happy. I don't think we'll ever be able to get rid of any. I mean, look at the assassinations historically. I mean, the Kennedy assassination, you'd think that maybe someday we'd get past that too, but I think no matter what happens, there's always going to be, some connection. Well, that person knew that person who knew Paulus. We've got to close the book at some point in time.
Okay.
And I'm hoping that we've now at least taken the first step to doing that, and come January, I'm hoping that we're done with it.
Okay.
One frustration that Cheryl and I have had, and maybe she could even explain it better than I can, with Bill Lennon's office has been on things like open meetings inquiries for the local city council. It seems like, and I like Bill, but it seems like he was very quick to farm things like that out, or at least not investigate them to our satisfaction. Is that a fair description?
Well, we didn't actually file our complaint with him.
Right.
We just went ahead and filed it right with the Attorney General's office. And looking back on things, that was the smartest thing to do, although it's taking forever. But he ended up turning all that stuff over to the AG's office anyway, because his sister started marketing some of the Five Rivers properties.
Yeah. And my bigger question
So,
around this is, what would be your view on things like open meetings complaints dealing with local government? Will you address those as aggressively as you seem to want to address violent crime and drugs and so on?
Yes and no, because I don't see those as a danger to the community. So would those take the priority over a homicide or a rape case in my mind? No.
Right.
However, those are the types of things that just simply education will help. The Attorney General's office has sent people out before to do training with local municipalities, cities, on the open records rules, laws. Oftentimes I think if you were just to open up the lines of communication, if you're going to have a meeting, if you want to call the DA's office, check with us and see if it falls under the open meetings laws, call us. We'll be responsive. So I think we can probably take on a lot of that, and maybe it's just the optimist in me, but I don't think it's ever done, with any malicious intent. I think it may just be a misunderstanding. So I guess my first approach would just simply to be, here, this is what the rules are. Let us lay them out for you so everybody knows. And if you have any questions, call us and we'll answer your questions. So,
being in the position that you're in, though, as DA, and this is, I think, something that we've run into in the past here also, is that, because Bill Lennon, or whoever the DA may be, sometimes has a fair amount of involvement with some of these folks, and therefore it's a conflict of interest for him to make a decision in that area. And instead of just giving it to one of his deputy DAs or an assistant DAs, he's farmed it out to other counties. And there, it really takes a low place on the totem pole, because it's not even their county and they don't care. And you can wait months and months and months for a decision coming from another county's DA. So what would your approach be to something like that?
I guess in part I don't know how big of a problem this is. I didn't even realize that there was much of a problem on it, and maybe that's because we're not keeping them internally. I haven't been involved in any of them. I would certainly hope that it's something where they intend to comply, they want to comply, they maybe just didn't do it right. So I don't know. I guess I'll have to wait and see how big of a problem it really is. If somebody seems to be intentionally trying to keep the general public out of meetings that should be open, then I think we have to do something about it. We have to step in. And conflicts are difficult to determine sometimes, because the community may see a conflict where the individual doesn't, or the individual, it could be flip-flopped. So, a conflict arises whenever you believe that your judgment would be impacted either for or against an individual or a group. That's a different standard than how the community sees it. The community may not like the decision you make and say, I don't think it was fair and unbiased. So in Winnebago County, there is a lot of skepticism over the DA's office. I think it's fair to say that we're probably under the microscope more than most DA's offices are. People are going to question what we're doing for a while. It's going to take us some time to continue to build and restore that integrity and trust with the community. So perhaps early on, and for several years now, depending on how it goes, we may still have to farm more things out until the community has enough confidence in us that we keep them internally. And that's just something that we have to gauge through the community.
Okay. Speaking of conflicts, have you been endorsed by local law enforcement? Say, Sheriff Mike Brooks, has he endorsed you?
No,
Okay,
he hasn't yet. I haven't talked to him about
Okay,
it.
but other law enforcement personnel?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Judges
No, judges are not allowed to endorse.
are not allowed to. Okay.
Right.
Talk
At least
about,
not in a partisan
all right.
race.
Some people have concerns that when law enforcement endorse potential DAs, it sets up a conflict, because often in your job you have to investigate the behavior
Right.
of the police. So why is it okay to accept endorsements from law enforcement officials, especially if they're police?
Well, we have 160,000 people in this county, and the district attorney's office, even though we draw a lot of scrutiny from the media, criticism from some people, praise from others, most of the community doesn't pay attention to the DA's office at all. So when people go out to vote for a district attorney, I don't know how many of them will have visited our website, gone through the issues, gone through what we're proposing. I don't know how many of them will do the research the way that they will, say, for an assembly position or for the governor's race. You know, they may just kind of walk in blind. Well, one of the things that endorsements in general do is it lets people know that these groups or these type of people are supporting this candidate. And we currently have over 140 members of law enforcement who are publicly endorsing. And
140 that are publicly endorsing you. 140. Okay.
correct. We also have about 50 local attorneys who are publicly endorsing us. I think it's around 20 either current or former elected officials. You know, well over 100 community members and leaders. So taken as a whole, we have a very diverse group. Is it a conflict to have 140 members of law enforcement publicly endorsing me when I also have 50 local attorneys or local and regional attorneys? I don't think so. I think the message from law enforcement is this is somebody who we believe in, this is somebody that we have faith in, we've worked with them, we trust them. But when you throw in the law enforcement, or the...
But you may, as I'm sure you agree with me,
right.
you may have to at some point be in an adversarial relationship with one or more of those people who endorsed you. So how do you assure the voters that when that adversarial relationship happens, if it happens, that endorsement won't even come into play?
Well, I don't know how that endorsement would be any different than a person who belonged to the same church, or a person who was in your neighborhood, or a person who was a friend of your brother or cousin. I mean, we're in Winnebago County. There's 2 degrees of separation, not 6, between any 2 parties out here. It makes our community a very nice place, a very friendly place. But you can find a conflict wherever you want to try to find a conflict. You know, I've made it very clear as a prosecutor when I'm talking to police officers, when I'm doing training with them, I hold cops and prosecutors to a higher standard. I always will. Believe it or not, cops are okay with that. That's all right with them. You know, they understand that the state has a monopoly on use of force. We have a monopoly on power. We should be held to a higher standard. So when I'm coming and telling them that, and they're still choosing to publicly endorse me, I don't think they're doing it so that they hope I go light on them in the future.
All right.
I think it's more a vote of confidence.
Okay. Cheryl?
And the same thing I'm assuming then would be true for the attorneys who are endorsing you. If you are prosecuting one of their you know, clients, you know, I think it goes without saying that you know, they may expect that, well, you know, I was supportive of Christian's campaign. Maybe he'll cut me a little slack here.
I won the jury trial on Monday against an attorney who's been very supportive of me. I want to give him a break.
All right, excellent.
But you know, on that, I think the flip side is actually more detrimental. What does it say if nobody from law enforcement supports you? If no local attorneys support you? What does that tell the larger community? Because when you're talking about police officers and you're talking about attorneys, you know, you throw in some elected officials and community leaders, you're talking about the people who are in the know. The people who understand, you know, who the parties are that are running, who the candidates are, what they stand for, what their experience is, what their perception of them is. So if that all goes one way, I think that sends a strong message to the general public. And I don't think the message is everybody's expecting special favors. I think it's there's much more faith placed in this person.
Okay. You had talked earlier about specialization in the
Right.
DA's office, and I think that that's great that we can have people who, this is their area of expertise, if you will. By the same token, I think when you specialize, there's a feeling out there, shared by many people, that specialization can end up costing money. How would you respond to that?
I'm not sure how it would end up costing money.
Well, for example, and this was a question that had been sent to us from the first time around that we didn't get to.
Oh,
so,
okay.
I'm going to have to try and kind of read into this, but if you've got someone whose specialty is, say, child molestation cases, and that's all they're really focusing on. I mean, would they, in a situation like that, Christian, be focusing on anything else? Would they be handling any other cases, or would that be their only area that they pursue?
That'll never be the only area, because when I'm
Okay.
talking about specialization, I'm talking about for general felony areas. So it wouldn't be child molestation, it would be sensitive crimes. Sensitive crimes would be sexual assaults of children, sexual assaults of adults. It would just be a much broader area. But even when we get these attorneys specialized in a felony area, there's still going to be the misdemeanor cases that we'll come across. So your drug prosecutor may be handling some fourth-degree sexual assaults. They'll be handling some obstructions. Nobody's going to be completely out of the loop. And I think our message got a little bit twisted during the primary race about what we meant by specialization. But when we got to the end of the primary, even my opponent had an idea for an emphasis in the office, which was essentially my idea for specialization. So throughout the course of the primary, the ideas had come together.
Okay.
And so I don't see it costing more. If anything, I see quite a bit of savings.
Okay.
I think that we'll see, less time preparing for cases, less time charging cases. Law enforcement will become more familiar with what they need to do in each type of case. Because if you think about it, if you have, say, a sexual assault case, well, with 10 different prosecutors, you will get 10 different opinions about how much is enough in each area. So law enforcement may be going back and doing follow-up investigation after follow-up investigation after follow-up investigation. The standard will change every time the attorney changes. Well, with one attorney handling the felony area, that will set the stage for all of the investigations for all of law enforcement consistently. And the other attorneys who are handling the fourth-degree sexual assaults, the misdemeanors, sensitive crimes, they will adopt whatever the person handling the felony sensitive crimes will. We'll actually have protocols. Officers will be able to essentially have a checklist of what they need to do. It may not be a literal checklist, but by doing it over and over again the same way, they'll end up with a virtual checklist for each type of offense.
Okay.
So when we start saving all of this follow-up investigation time, not only will we save taxpayer dollars on overtime, but we'll free up more of our officers so that they can be out there keeping us safe.
Okay. Well, hopefully that answered the person's question out there, because I'm really just trying to read into what you said, and I hope I read into it all right. So, all right.
Let's talk for a second about the use of force by police. And I have in mind non-traditional things like tasers,
Okay.
less lethal weapons. Many people in our society are convinced that these instruments, if you will, are being abused by the police. Do you think it's the role of a DA to take a close look at the use of force of police?
I think that's primarily the role of the department themselves. Departments risk civil lawsuits if they go too far.
Yeah.
And I know that tasers get used, I wouldn't say a lot, but they certainly get used.
Yeah.
And the reality is, if you're using a taser, what are your options? Well, you could hit them over the head with your nightstick. You could shoot them, you could tase them, you could tackle them. Really, the one that's going to be the safest is to tase them. It incapacitates them temporarily. The officers move in and put cuffs on them. So the whole idea behind going to tasers, going to things like mace, is so that we don't have to risk the injuries to the officers or the person who's being apprehended. Certainly it's not comfortable. I've gotten tased myself and I've gotten pepper sprayed myself in training.
I was going to say, was there some wild youth or something?
No, yeah. When I was in the police academy, we had to get pepper sprayed.
Okay.
Horrible stuff. I don't like that at all. And then I think they might have done it for fun, but I was out at one of our local departments doing some training, and they thought it would be a good idea if I took just a quick little zap from a taser, so I knew what it was like, because I had missed out on that experience when I was in the police academy.
Right.
We weren't using tasers back then.
One of the reasons why I bring this up, Christian, is because I think that the overwhelming majority of our police in Winnebago County are fine, upstanding citizens who do their job with the utmost of skill. But occasionally you get citizens who claim that they were brutalized. And do you feel that those citizens who have those claims, is there a good process for them to go through? Like, for example, Winnebago County doesn't have anything like a citizens commission to
No, we don't have a citizen review board.
Yeah, should we have something like that in your judgment?
I
Some
guess I don't know
communities
if, yeah, some communities have it, and it's typically the larger communities. When you get out to the bigger cities, you'll see the citizen review boards. I don't know that we need it here. That's certainly something that's up to the citizens. I think first and foremost, it's something that should go through the departments. The departments, I certainly think, would take very seriously if they, usually what you're talking about is not an isolated incident.
Yeah.
You're usually looking for a trend. If one officer is consistently getting these complaints, then that's typically something that the department's going to look into, and they're doing it for their own interest because they're risking lawsuits. And
well, just to give you one specific example, back in the Paulus era, we had a situation where through the use of less lethal weapons, a man was put in a coma, and he later died. And Paulus had a John Doe hearing, or I guess an inquest hearing, they called it. And the inquest jury came back and said that these officers should be put on trial. And then at that point, Paulus farmed it out to E. Michael McCann in Milwaukee, where it sat, remember, for almost 2 years?
Yes.
In a case like that, let's say, hypothetically, we hope it never happens, someone is put in a coma through force, would you open up an inquest jury?
Inquests aren't a bad thing to do. And an inquest, I think people have varying opinions of what those actually are, but really all you're doing in a situation like that is taking some people from the community, putting them up there, you're explaining the situation to them, you're letting the officer tell them what was going through their mind, what was happening, you're putting on the officers training personnel, who trained them for how to deal with these types of situations. You're putting all the information out there, and you're asking them to tell you what they think. When that decision comes back, that doesn't mean you have to act on it. It's purely advisory. If the situation arose in Winnebago County, it probably wouldn't be a bad tool to use. Again, just building more trust with the community. Look, we put all our cards on the table. We're not doing anything funny. Here it is. This is what they thought.
All right, sure.
Okay. Being a DA, you would have to not only be a good prosecutor, but you'd have to be a good manager, a good leader. Do you think that one is more important than the other, or are they both equally important? And how will you, Christian Gossett, if you're elected next month, handle that balance?
Well, handling the balance is going to depend on what's happening in the community, what's happening with cases. Certainly, I plan on spending an awful lot of time with the managerial side of it, because we have so much that I want to get implemented, and I want to get programs underway. I want to get the training underway. I want to get better communication going with the local departments, the local communities, but at the same time, I want the community to know that they will see me in court. I want to make sure that I'm in court on a regular basis. I want them to see my face when we're talking about the serious incidents, knowing that I'm not running away from anything. I'm there. I'm fighting for them. I'm out there doing what I'm supposed to do. So when there's a heavier caseload, they'll see me in court more. When I get the opportunity, they'll see me out in the community more. So it's just going to depend on what's happening. But
the Oshkosh Northwestern editorialized a couple of months ago that this race, the district attorney, should be nonpartisan. You're running as the Republican.
Correct.
And there's a Democrat running. Do you agree with that? Is there a Republican brand of justice at the DA level and a Democratic brand? Should it be, or is justice nonpartisan?
Justice is nonpartisan. I'm not sure why it's a partisan race. I have no idea. Do I ever think that this state will turn it around and make it a nonpartisan race? Absolutely not. Would I have a
Well,
problem?
certainly, forgive me for interrupting, but
No
certainly at the state level, if we look at Van Hollen versus Falk,
Right.
I think most people would agree that Van Hollen is more of a lock 'em up and throw away the key guy, and Falk is more of a, let's use,
Right.
More.
Well, but at the Attorney General's level, you're talking about an agency that not only goes after criminal offenders, but an agency that also goes after consumer protection violations, businesses, agriculture. So I think you see more of that partisanship impact.
So you think it makes more sense at that level?
Right. I think it makes more sense at that level. For a local district attorney, I don't really understand it, but you have all of these people who are elected district attorneys, and they're either Republicans or Democrats in Republican or Democratic counties, and they're not going to want it to go nonpartisan, and suddenly they now have an opponent who's not identified with either party, while they always have been. So I think it would be tricky to get people to sign on to it. Quite honestly, we've never run our campaign as though this was a partisan race. And we've always stayed away from it because the reality is everybody in our community is concerned about their safety.
Absolutely.
And everybody wants to improve quality of life. There's not Republican and Democratic safety. There's not Republican and Democratic quality of life. There's Winnebago County safety and quality of life.
Okay. Does the Winnebago County DA's office, I know you said you're down a couple or maybe 3 DAs right now, but do you have any fat in your budget there that you can see?
I'm going to have to go over the budget very, very carefully. What's been happening for several years now is district attorneys' offices are financed 2 ways. Part of our budget comes from the state. The state pays for the attorneys, and the state pays for things like our computers, and then a few other odds and ends items. The county pays for the staff positions, the office space, the office furniture, and most of those costs. So what's happened in the last several years is we'd get cut at the state level, and then we'd get cut at the county level. So instead of taking a 5% cut, we'd take a 10% cut. And there seemed to be some difficulty getting the state and the county to understand that while everybody else is getting, a 5% cut or whatever it was that year, we're getting hit twice. So if there's not a lot. Now, certainly there's things that could be done to reduce the budget. Such as, well, we used to have 3 investigators in the office. We now have 2. Well, having investigators in the district attorney's office, in theory, you can eliminate those 2 positions because we can rely on law enforcement. The downside is, if you eliminate those 2 positions, the taxpayers will save money in the budget for the DA's office, but it will cost them more money because now we will have to bring in the detectives from the different departments and the investigators. So instead of working on what they were working on, say, in the city of Menasha, now we need them to come down to the district attorney's office, sit down, chat with us so that we can send them out to go do 5 minutes worth of investigation so that they can come back, report that back to us, and drive back up to the city of Menasha. So what now would have taken our investigator 15 minutes has now cost the city of Menasha, an hour and a half, 2 hours. And it's taken an officer out of the mix-up there for a couple hours. So we could eliminate some of the redundant services. However, there's so much savings overall. I mean, it would be penny wise and pound foolish. But nonetheless, if somebody just wants to look at the bottom line, there's things like that could happen.
Well, and as cities are dealing with budget crunches too, and looking at making certain cuts within essential services, you may at some point need your own investigators.
Right.
If they're going to be taking a hit on their end because you can't have them getting overtaxed.
Right. Well, and the reality is law enforcement doesn't move without the DA's office. So we will always have to be a priority to a certain extent. Police officers can arrest somebody on the street for the most violent crime, but they can't hold them for more than 48 hours without us intervening.
Okay.
So,
Christian, what is your level of commitment to this position? It seems like we've had a situation where people get elected to a DA, then they immediately want to run for judge. Is this something that you would stay in for? Do you want to do 1 term, 2 terms? Do you want to be a U.S. attorney someday? Do you want to be a judge? What do you want to be when you grow up?
You want to be president?
What I'm really asking is, are you pledging?
Is this a stepping stone?
But this is not a 4-year term, right?
No, this is a 2-year term.
It's still a
for the first
2-year term.
And then it
Okay.
becomes a 4-year term.
Okay, so you're committed to completing a 2-year term.
Right.
All right. Do you think you'd want to stay for multiple terms in this position?
You'll see me running again in 2 years.
Right.
You know, going back to when I was in the police academy, you know, I went to law school to be a prosecutor. You know, I didn't go to law school to be a judge. I didn't go to law school to be a civil attorney. I went to law school specifically because I really wanted to be a prosecutor. I love what I do. You know, we get to do the right thing all the time. Not always the popular thing, but we get to do the right thing. You know, we don't zealously advocate. We seek truth. We seek justice. You know, those are nice catchphrases, but they're also true. You know, we always get to be the good person.
Okay.
You know, we don't have to go do something that we don't believe in. And I love working with law enforcement. I have so much fun getting involved in these cases. And, you know, you'll still find me out at crime scenes at 11, 12, midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning. Doesn't matter. I get pages, I get phone calls, and I roll out of bed and my hair's, well, it's always like this, I guess. But, you know, just half awake, grab a cup of coffee on the way out the door, and I'm out to a crime scene. I enjoy every part of the job.
You have been at a fair number of crime scenes. Is that something different from what most of the DAs in this office do?
It is. It was the way that I was trained. You know, going out to a crime scene gives you several advantages. First of all, by having seen it, when you're in the courtroom for a jury trial in the end, you know, you've actually been there. You're not interpreting the crime scene through photographs. So you've got the advantage in the courtroom. For the police officers that are there and for the taxpayers, quite honestly, when you're there, you can look at the scene and say, okay, when this goes to trial, if I were the defense attorney, I'd go after this, 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 and this, and you can start working on that. You know, you may have to ask some more questions of witnesses, but if you do it right there, the witnesses are there. If those things are sent into the district attorney's office and a prosecutor reviews the police reports 2 weeks after the fact and then sends back 5 or 6 letters saying, now I want you to do this, and I want you to go talk to this person, I want you to look at that. Well, now all of these people have to come back together, spread out, go find these people, go find the evidence. So it's a lot easier to do when you're right there. I think it makes us better. I also learn a lot, quite honestly. Sure. I went out to a crime scene, well, a potential crime scene where a house had blown up, and the fire marshal was there. I learned a lot. Things that would have taken me quite a while to pick up and reading about the case and then trying to do some research on my own. You know, I walked through and just watched and listened. So I also learn a lot when I'm out at those. So I just think it makes for a better prosecution, a better investigation all the way around.
Okay, excellent. We're almost out of time, so why don't you take about 60 seconds, look into camera 3 there, Christian, and tell folks why they should vote for you on Tuesday, November 7th.
I'm asking for your vote on Tuesday, November 7th. In this particular race, experience matters. I've been a prosecutor for coming up on 5 years. I've handled over 4,000 criminal cases, including 4 homicides. I've handled over 26 criminal trials, and we need a law enforcement leader who is going to start moving law enforcement forward and has the experience necessary to do that. Thank you.
Alrighty, and you do have a website?
I do.
GossettForDA.com.
Correct.
Is there any other contact information that you'd like to give out to the audience?
I think if you can get to the website, that'll probably be the best.
Okay.
Our campaign phone number is 920-729-7980.
Okay.
Great.
All right, very good. Thanks so much for being here again.
Oh, thank you.
And,
Appreciate the
best of luck to
opportunity.
you next month. All right, Tony, thank you. And as always, thank you at home for letting us in your homes for the last hour. We'll see you next time. Be sure and go to the polls on Tuesday, November 7th and vote too. We'll see you next time. Until then, take good care. Keep your eye on us. We've got our eye on Oshkosh.